I think everybody knows that I'm Barbara. I assume that we're all friends of Sharon's. And I want to say, too, if you can remember when you're speaking to say who you are, because we're recording this for the benefit of Trent, Sharon's son, and her two grandchildren, and other people that for one reason or another are not able to be here today. So if you can just remember to say your name, it'll be helpful to them listening. If we're hoping we can get a good recording. So I'm Barbara, and we're going to start. One thing Sharon loved to do was read the Vedic scriptures. And so we're going to start with just some brief passages from some of the Vedic scriptures that she liked to read. And why don't you start, Brad, with the reading from the Gita?
Brad Frager, I'm Barbara's husband, and this is from the Vedic scriptures. Chapter 2, verse 11, The blessed Lord said, "You grieve for those for whom there should be no grief, yet speak as do the wise. Wise men grieve neither for the dead nor for the living." Then chapter 12, "There never was a time when I was not, nor you, nor these rulers of men, nor will there ever be a time when all of us shall cease to be." Verse 13, "As the dweller in this body passes into childhood, youth, and age, so also does it pass into another body. This does not bewilder the wise."
Okay, so now I'm going to read from the Upanishads, and I'm going to read from the Mundaka Upanishad, part 3. Like two golden birds perched on the self-same tree, intimate friends, the ego and the self, dwell in the same body. The former eats the sweet and sour fruits of the tree of life, while the latter looks on in detachment. As long as we think we are the ego, we feel attached and fall into sorrow. But realize that you are the self, the Lord of life, and you will be freed from sorrow. When you realize that you are the self, supreme source of light, supreme source of love, you transcend the duality of life and enter into the unitive state. The Lord of love shines in the hearts of all. Seeing him in all creatures, the wise forget themselves in the service of all. The Lord is their joy, the Lord is their rest. Such as they are the lovers of the Lord. By truth, meditation, and self-control, one can enter into this state of joy and see the self shining in a pure heart. Truth is victorious, never untruth. Truth is the way. Truth is the goal of life, reached by the sages who are free from self-will. The effulgent self, who is beyond thought, shines in the greatest, shines in the smallest, shines in the farthest, shines in the nearest, shines in the secret chamber of the heart. Beyond the reach of the senses is he, but not beyond the reach of a mind stilled through the practice of deep meditation. Beyond the reach of words and works is he, but not beyond the reach of a pure heart, freed from the sway of the senses. Sages are granted all the help they need in everything they do to serve the Lord. Let all those who seek their own fulfillment love and honor the illumined sage. The wise have attained the unitive state and see only the resplendent Lord of love. Desiring nothing in the physical world, they have become one with love. So, Judy, would you like to read next?
Yes, that was so beautiful, Barbara, and so appropriate for Sharon. Sharon and I shared many phone conversations where I would read to her from Dr. Nader's book, consciousness is all
Could you
there
speak
is.
a little louder?
Or share quotes from Maharishi Mahesh Yogi, who brought transcendental meditation into her life and whose work she studied throughout the years. One quote she especially liked is from the beginning of Dr. Nader's book. The most important element in everyone's life is our personal consciousness. In its pure state, consciousness is an infinite reservoir of creativity and intelligence. Knowledge was important to Sharon, and here is one quote she particularly embodied. "Enjoy this day, it is life. Every day is life." It's not that we pass over the present for some glorious future. We are working out unity, but it should never be thought that we won't start to live life until we are in unity. All the days would be lost. When we live in the present, nature works out our destiny. And that's a quote from January 28, 1978 from Maharishi. One question Dr. Nader raised in his book also seemed answered with a yes in Sharon's life, and actually refers to the two swans, I think.
Birds.
Your two birds that you mentioned. Is it possible that our universe has simultaneously chaos and order? Sometimes chaos and drama reigned on the surface of Sharon's life, while she remained grounded in deep silence, alert to knowledge. Her awareness tied the beauty, graceful life, and loving family of her childhood and her son and grandchildren to her continuing enjoyment of life. Over and over, she experienced what Maharishi described when he said, "The unified field is the one ultimate reality, because at bottom, beneath all layers and expressions, that's what you find. That infinite, unbounded, no thingness. Ultimately, everything is made out of that. It's like made from gold. We have a gold bracelet, a gold ring, a gold chain, and a gold statue. The golden consciousness seen in Sharon's studies, her interactions with people, her work giving us the 21st Century Bookstore, changed our world for the better. In terms of physics, this process is described by John Wheeler, Princeton's distinguished professor of physics, who said, "Nothing is more important about the quantum principle than this, that it destroys the concept of the world sitting out there, with the observer safely separated from it by a 20 centimeter slab of plate glass. Even to observe such a minuscule object as an electron, he must shatter the glass. He must reach in. Moreover, the measurement changes the state of the electron. The universe will never afterwards be the same. To describe what has happened, one has to cross out the old word, observer, and put in its place the new word, participator. In some strange sense, the universe is a participatory universe." And that's what John Wheeler said. And Sharon was definitely a participator and affected our world for the better. Another quote from Dr. Nader was, "Like our sense of time, space is also a construct of our intellect and our perceptual abilities. In fact, everything exists at the same place, which is a point and infinity at the same time. If you look at it as a point, it is nothingness. If you look at it as infinity, it is fullness. Fullness and emptiness are the same. Every point contains wholeness, totality. I'll share a poem Sharon liked by William Blake, which illustrates this. To see the world in a grain of sand and a heaven in a wild flower. Hold infinity in the palm of your hand and eternity in an hour. William Blake, Auguries of Innocence. So I'm going to conclude with a few additional quotes that Sharon liked and lived. Every experience you have, every instance of consciousness that you have, creates possibilities that were not available to you before you had that experience. While living happens in sequential moments, one bit of consciousness followed by another, one wave after the other, life itself remains immortal and transcends the endless field of birth and death. Many small daily awakenings, glimpses that come and fade away, eventually result in one expansive, permanent awakening to the unity of our true nature. Consciousness exists. Consciousness is all there is, and consciousness is conscious.
Okay, this is Paul Shimura. I'm going to read from the Yoga Vasishta, section 4 on existence. The mind is like the vast ocean with infinite variety of creatures within it, on the surface of which ripples and waves of different sizes rise and fall. The small wave thinks it is small, the big one that it is big. The one that is broken by the wind thinks it has been destroyed. One thinks it is cold, another thinks that it is warm. But all the waves are but the water of the ocean. It is indeed true to say that there are no waves in the ocean. The ocean alone exists. Yet it is also true that there are waves. Even so, the absolute Brahman alone exists. Since it is omnipotent, the natural expression of its infinite faculties appears as the infinite diversity in this universe. Diversity has no real existence except in one's own imagination. All this is indeed the absolute Brahman. Remain established in this truth. Give up all other notions, even as the waves are not different from the ocean. All these things are not different from Brahman. Even as in the seed is hidden the entire tree in potential, in Brahman there exists the entire universe forever. Even as the multicolored rainbow is produced by sunlight, all the diversity is seen in the one. Even as the inert web emanates from the living spider, this inert world appearance has sprung from infinite consciousness. Even as the silkworm weaves its cocoon and thus binds itself, the infinite being fancies this universe and gets caught in it. Even as an elephant effortlessly breaks loose from the post to which it is tied, the self liberates itself from its bondage. For the self is what it considers itself to be. In fact, there is neither bondage nor liberation for the Lord. I do not know how these notions of bondage and liberation have come into being. There is neither bondage nor liberation, only the infinite being is seen. Yet the eternal is veiled by the transient and this is indeed a great wonder or a great illusion. Though revolving thus in the wheel of ignorance and delusion, when one steps on to the wisdom concerning the supreme truth, he is instantly redeemed.
Welcome, Vera. We're glad you could join us. I knew for sure someone else was coming. We just didn't know who. Sharon's friend Don Ahrens from Iowa City wrote a few words that he wanted me to share. He wasn't able to be here today, but I don't know how many of you knew that Sharon had a friendship with Don, who he met Sharon through the bookstore. And almost every Saturday evening, they would have a phone call. And many Saturdays, I would have lunch with Sharon, and we would spend the afternoon together. And we always had to make sure we had her home for that phone call, because it was obvious that that was a very important phone call for her. So this is what Don wanted me to share with you. My moments and years with Sharon go deeply beyond words. Although my heart fondly remembers the billions of words that surrounded me each time I visited her bookstore in Fairfield, and later her in phone conversations every Saturday evening. But my most sacred times, beyond time, are those spaces of silence and stillness of our practice of meditation, which unite us and will continue to do so forever and ever. Don Ahrens, Iowa City. I thought those were very beautiful words that he wanted to share with us. So now I just want to, those of you who want to can share, I thought it'd just be nice to share some memories of Sharon. And I want to start by saying that I met Sharon it's in Cedar Rapids, Iowa, in probably about February of 1974. We had, my first husband and I had moved to Cedar Rapids. So we had just arrived in Cedar Rapids. We'd been meditating for several years, and we were very enthusiastic TMers. So one of the first things we did was look up the local TM center. And so we found the TM Center, and a guy named Bruce Grady was the center chairman. Probably some of you folks know Bruce Grady. He was, I think, pretty fresh back from teacher training at the time, and he was running the TM Center in Cedar Rapids. And it seemed like maybe even the first day that I visited the TM Center, it seems like it might have been the first day, Sharon dropped in with her son Trent. At the time, Trent was about 9 years old. Sharon was divorced, and Trent usually lived with his dad, but Sharon had him at the time with her, and he just looked to me like Dennis the Menace. That's kind of how he looked, and So that was the day that Sharon and I met, and I would have been about 25 at the time, and Sharon was about 29, I think. And to be real honest with you, I'm being perfectly honest, I didn't really like Sharon at first. And the first couple of times that I saw her coming my way, I just wanted to run the other way, because I really wasn't fond of her, but she was determined that we were going to be friends, and she basically didn't take no for an answer, and so we did become friends. And she was living for a while. She was living in Cedar Rapids, and then she was living in Kansas City, and it seemed like she was kind of bouncing back and forth between Cedar Rapids and Kansas City, and I lived in Cedar Rapids for about 7.5 years before I moved to Fairfield. Once I moved to Fairfield in 81, Sharon was already living here. I'm not sure when she moved here, but I think she'd already met Tony by then. And so I lived here for 3.5 years in the early 80s, and Sharon was living here. And I don't remember what year they started the bookstore, but it was probably during those years that I lived here that they started the bookstore. And then I moved to Texas, where I lived for many years. And but I would come to Fairfield every spring or summer because I'm from Iowa and all my family lives in the Ames area. And so I would come every year to visit my family and also to spend time in Fairfield because I had friends here, Sharon and several other friends that I had made while living here, and actually from Cedar Rapids that had moved to Fairfield. And so Sharon and I knew each other a long time, and then once Brad and I moved to Iowa in May of 2017, Sharon and I started spending quite a bit of time together. It's a really interesting thing that I discovered about Sharon and I think shortly before I moved to Iowa, was that we had some similarities in our charts, certainly differences too, but we both had Moon in Libra, which made it understandable that why we understood each other. And also we found out that our dasas were almost identical. She was about 2 weeks ahead of me, but otherwise our dasas were the same, even though there were several, like I said, she was several years older than I was. So what that meant was that we were going through our Ketu Mahadasa together during those. We had already started before I moved here, and so we were going through Ketu Mahadasa together. Now, I don't know if you've been through your own Ketu Mahadasa, but it can be quite an interesting time. For many people, quite an inward time, and it certainly was that for me, and I think also for Sharon. And so anyway, it was just interesting that we were both going through that time together, and of course also it was all during the COVID years, and so anyway, especially during that K2 time, we would spend at least 1 day a week together, and sometimes it ended up being 2 days, 2 afternoons that we would be together. It was just interesting that it worked out to be that way when I started off thinking that I really didn't like Sharon very much. So who else would like to talk about their friendship with Sharon?
I go by Vera Elizabeth, and I've been in Fairfield mostly since 1980. And I met Sharon in late 80s, early 90s, and I worked for her in her home. She was such an awesome cook and so gracious and so wonderful to work for. And so glad I got to be part of her world and her part of mine. Namaste.
This is Paul Shimura. I'm probably the last friend she met before she passed away. I met her like 5 days before she passed away at that care center. Anyway, I met her when I came to Fairfield in 1987, when I went to the 21st Century Bookstore, So that's how I met her. And then years later, the thing about Sharon is she has a very sharp and active intellect, and she had a very strong desire to learn stuff, especially spiritual stuff. So she was interested in learning what's called Jyotish, or Vedic astrology of the India, what Barbara was talking about. So I'm a qualified Maharshi Jyotish teacher, so I was giving her lessons, and that's when we really became close. And she would like cook for me. She was an excellent cook too. And we would go to Iowa City together. We spent a lot of time. We were spending like once a week time. And she was, relatively healthy. But then one day she tripped and fell on her back in her apartment, and she became hunched back. Yeah, really. And I think she fell again, maybe. And her back was really bad. And then she was living, she could take care of herself for a while, but then eventually it just got too much. And friends were helping her, but it came to its own limits. So she moved to that, Parkview? Yeah. She moved to Parkview, and I would visit her there. And then what happened was, like a week before she passed away, she fell again. And then she ended up in a wheelchair with a cast or brace around her neck. Yeah. And that was the last time I saw her. And then when I went to see her again, she was already gone. But yeah, what was impressive about her was her mind was so sharp. I took her to a doctor once, and she would ask all these really intelligent, deep questions about health and medicine, and just once she starts talking, she doesn't stop. She's going ga 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 ga. But I was really impressed listening to her talking to the doctor. She was really sharp, but she was also very friendly, and we took a lot of walks together before the fall. She was a good friend to me.
I was blessed by the bookstore before I knew who Sharon was. And this is Judy White. And I very much appreciated the bookstore, but I didn't really know Sharon. And one day, probably about 10 years ago, I was walking down the street and I didn't have a ride home. And she had a coat that looked like a friend's. And so I thought I was looking at my friend, and I walked up to her to ask for a ride. Sharon looked at me and saw that I needed a ride somehow. So we got connected. I said, could I get a ride? And she said, oh, yes. And so at that point, she said, well, today is Ash Wednesday. Do you want to go to to Lutheran Church to go to Ash Wednesday? So I went with her. And for a little while, we were friends going to the church together. And then eventually, we both became more housebound. 2020 pretty much took care of that. And her computer and her tablet and everything quit working. So she didn't have email. So you couldn't communicate with her any other way except phone. And she couldn't read something on the computer. So I knew she would be interested in Dr. Nader's book, which was only on the computer. So I said, well, would you like me to call you and, read to you? So for the next couple years, that's what we would do. Ever so often, 3 or 4 times a week, I would talk to her and read some of these, quotes that I read today and different material. And I was very impressed with the depth of her knowledge and the depth of her understanding. And ever so often, she just mentioned how many courses she'd taken over the years, how many Ayurvedic treatments she'd had over the years, how much she deeply delved into the knowledge. And of course, I think that's one of the reasons she wanted 21st Century Bookstore, was to spread the knowledge, to share the knowledge, and to bathe in it. She loved going up to the upstairs where there was all this scriptural knowledge and just enjoy it herself. So that's what I know. And then I'm going to share something about Andrew a little bit. And I don't know how she became friends with Andrew, but ever so often she needed something. And so I would email Andrew and say, Sharon needs this, or Sharon wants to know this, or Sharon has this question. And he would always respond so graciously.
This is Andrew speaking, Andrew Stenberg. Just to carry on that story a little bit. The way we first met was only a few years ago. We only knew each other for a few years. But she was selling her blue Subaru Forester. And I was looking at buying it from her. And we had a few, we'd meet together and talk about things, and more than just car. We started exploring life, together and things, and doing things of that kind, chattering. And then she wanted to take that car up to Cedar Rapids to have the Subaru dealers look at it to see if they would trade it or value it or buy it from her, a few things like that. And so it started a routine that we had quite often where she liked to shop, and we would go up to Iowa City or to Cedar Rapids, Costco, places, and chatter all the way, and chatter all the way back. And it was always a lot of fun. We both enjoyed it very much. And so I've been away overseas for the last 6 or 8 months mostly. And so I wasn't aware that she'd passed, I mentioned to Judy. And but the interesting thing was, I only got back a couple of weeks ago, and I had these, it was like from a distance, Sharon would come into my mind and as if wave to me or talk to me, just to be there, just not to really talk to me, but just to be present. And it repeated itself a number of times over the last 6 or 8 weeks. And I was so surprised when I got the email about what had happened with her. Not really surprised, but bemused. And it was just like maybe she was saying goodbye because I wasn't around to get the news. And I thought that was very kind of her. Thank you, Sharon.